Daniel's absence had become part of the house itself. His empty chair at dinner, his untouched coffee mug, the way his voice only arrived through phone calls that grew shorter with time. I used to count the days until he came home. Now I just counted the silences in between. Sometimes I wondered if he still saw me, or if I'd become another piece of furniture in this house he'd stopped living in. Ryan came back from university around the same time Daniel's trips became longer. He was quieter than I remembered, taller, sharper around the edges, with eyes that didn't give away much. At first, I thought he resented me for something, maybe for being the woman who replaced his mother, maybe for trying too hard to fill a space that was never mine. We hardly spoke beyond polite exchanges. Still, there was something in his presence that unsettled the quiet I had grown used to at nights stretched endlessly. I'd read half a book and realized I hadn't absorbed a single line. I'd stare at the ceiling, thinking of all the things Daniel and I stopped saying years ago. How love can turn into routine without either person noticing. How routine slowly becomes distance. I wasn't looking for anything, only trying to feel alive again, in a house where everything felt like a rehearsal for nothing. One night, while walking past Ryan's room, I heard him talking. His voice was low but sharp, full of emotion. At first, I thought it was anger, maybe a fight with a friend, but then I caught words that stopped me cold. "I can't tell her," he said, "because it would ruin everything." I froze, not out of curiosity but something deeper. I shouldn't have listened, but I did. There was pain in his tone, the kind people hide when they love someone they can't have. I didn't hear a name, just the raw ache in his voice. When he went silent, I quietly stepped away, pretending nothing had happened. But that voice stayed with me the next morning. I couldn't stop wondering who he'd been talking about. A classmate? Someone older? It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. There was a sadness in him that mirrored my own. I started noticing the small things, how he avoided eye contact at breakfast, how his jaw tensed whenever Daniel's name came up, how he spent hours lost in thought, like he was living in two worlds at once. Days passed like that. The curiosity turned into concern, the concern into something heavier. I told myself I just wanted to help him, that it was a motherly instinct. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Sometimes loneliness finds recognition in another person's silence. You don't need words, you just know. A week later, while tidying up the living room, I saw Ryan's phone left on the table. A message flashed before the screen went dark. I didn't mean to look, but the few words I saw were enough to twist my chest. "It's getting harder to hide." That was it. No name, no context. But it reopened the door in my mind that I'd been trying to close. That night I couldn't sleep. I thought about how little I actually knew about him, this young man who'd grown up under the same roof yet always seemed like a stranger. Maybe he was in trouble. Maybe it was something darker. Or maybe, like me, he was just caught in the wrong kind of loneliness, the kind that makes people do things they can't explain later. When morning came, I found him sitting on the porch, staring into nothing. I wanted to ask if he was okay, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I sat beside him. Silence hung between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. After a while, he said, "You ever feel like you're living a life that doesn't belong to you?" The question hit harder than he knew. I nodded, unsure how to answer without revealing too much. "All the time," I said finally. He smiled faintly, not looking at me. That was the first honest moment we shared, and it terrified me. Later that week, Daniel called to say he'd be gone another month. I pretended to be fine. I said I understood that work was important. But when the call ended, the house felt emptier than ever. Ryan was upstairs, the faint sound of his guitar leaking through the walls. It wasn't the music that moved me, it was the sadness behind every note. That I went upstairs later to check the laundry and noticed his door slightly open. On the desk was a stack of sketches, faces, mostly. One of them looked vaguely familiar. When I looked closer, my stomach tightened. It was me. Not perfect, not flattering, but unmistakably me, drawn with a kind of focus that felt almost intimate. I stepped back, heart racing, unsure what I was seeing. 1,000 explanations ran through my head, but none of them made sense. I left the room quickly, shutting the door without a sound. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen for hours, staring at the dark window, seeing my reflection in the glass. I couldn't tell if I was more disturbed or flattered. Maybe both. I thought about that sketch, about the voice I heard that night, and realized something had shifted between us, not because of what had been said or done, but because of what was now silently understood. The guilt started small, like a whisper. A thought I could still push away. But guilt has a way of growing roots when you ignore it. And in that silence, between what was right and what was real, something fragile began to take shape, something neither of us had asked for but could no longer deny was there. After that night, I started avoiding the upstairs hallway. It wasn't intentional, I just didn't trust myself near his door. Every time I passed it, I thought about the sketch and what it meant. I tried convincing myself it was harmless, an artist studying a face he saw daily. Still, the thought kept pulling at me, unsettling and magnetic at the same time. Ryan acted as if nothing had changed. He was polite, distant, almost careful. But there was a new quiet between us, not empty like before, alive, aware. He had started making coffee in the mornings, leaving a cup for me without saying a word. Small gestures, too small to mean anything, yet I noticed every one of them. Daniel called less often. When he did, the conversations felt forced. We spoke about bills, schedules, and flight dates, never about us. He promised another visit soon, and I said all the right words, but something in me already knew that promise meant little. I'd stopped waiting for him to come home, I'd started waiting for something else, something I couldn't name. One afternoon, rain pinned the house into silence. Ryan was painting in the living room. I told myself I'd only watch for a minute. He didn't look up when I entered, but he knew I was there. The smell of paint mixed with the sound of rain tapping the windows. On the canvas, soft shadows formed, a woman by a window, half turned away. When he finally looked up, our eyes met, and something unspoken passed between us, a truth neither of us had asked for. That I should have left, but I stayed. He asked if I wanted tea. We spoke about trivial things, the weather, the neighborhood, my work, but beneath it, every word carried another meaning. He told me how lonely it was living between two homes that never felt like his. I told him loneliness doesn't disappear when people are around, it just changes shape. He nodded, and for a second, I saw myself reflected in him, two people caught in different versions of the same emptiness. That night, I thought about boundaries, about the invisible lines we draw to feel safe. I'd crossed one already, the moment I let empathy turn into something more. It wasn't desire in the way people assume, it was recognition, the kind that pierces deeper than touch. Guilt followed like a shadow, but the guilt made it real. The days blurred. I started noticing how he listened when I spoke, how he remembered the smallest things I said. Once, I mentioned a book I loved years ago. 2 days later, it appeared on the kitchen counter. He said he found it online. I didn't ask why he bothered. The gesture itself said everything. One evening, while I was making dinner, the power went out. The storm had knocked out the grid again. The house was completely dark except for the faint light from his phone. He came into the kitchen, holding it up so I could see. We both laughed at how ridiculous it was, two people navigating a blackout like it was something extraordinary. The laughter stopped too quickly, replaced by silence that seemed louder than the storm outside. For a heartbeat, the air changed, the kind of pause that asked for something dangerous. Then he stepped back, and the moment dissolved. Later, lying in bed, I replayed that silence. It terrified me, how easy it was to fall into it. I wasn't the kind of woman who chased trouble, but trouble had a way of feeling like warmth after too long in the cold. I told myself it had to stop, that I needed to build distance again. But the next morning, he asked if I wanted to go for a walk. And I said yes. The park was nearly empty. The sky still heavy with clouds. We walked without speaking for most of it. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "You don't have to pretend you're okay," he said. I wanted to ask what made him think I wasn't, but my throat tightened. Some days I forget what okay feels like, I admitted. He looked at me then, eyes filled with a kind of honesty that left no space for pretense. "You remind me of someone trying to hold everything together for everyone else." I didn't answer, but he was right. Back home, Daniel's call came just as I stepped inside. He sounded tired, distracted, his attention elsewhere. He mentioned extending his trip again. I didn't argue. When I hung up, I found Ryan standing by the stairs, pretending not to have heard. The look on his face told me he had. I didn't say a word, just walked past him, but the silence between us said what words couldn't. That night, I dreamt of nothing but noise, doors closing, voices fading, clocks ticking too fast. When I woke up, the house felt foreign. I sat by the window, watching dawn crawl across the sky, feeling like I'd already crossed a line I couldn't return from, even though nothing had happened. That was the cruelest part, how guilt could exist without sin, how emotion could feel like betrayal long before action ever touched it. The next few days passed in careful distance. We both knew something fragile was forming, though neither of us would name it. Every conversation was cautious, every glance heavy. Yet, beneath all that restraint, there was understanding. When two lonely people recognize themselves in each other, it's not romance, it's surrender. Daniel finally called to say he'd be home in 2 days. Relief and panic collided in me. I should have felt joy, but instead, I felt fear. Fear of what his presence would expose. Fear of what had already changed without being said. The night before he returned, I sat outside on the porch. Ryan joined me quietly. We didn't speak for a long time. The air between us felt fragile, as if one wrong word could break it completely. Then he said, "Some things you feel even when you try not to." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. When he stood to leave, he hesitated for a second, his hand brushing the railing near mine, not touching, just close enough to make the air thicken. Then he turned away and went inside. I stayed there long after, staring at the sky that refused to lighten. The truth was simple and unbearable. I had done nothing wrong, yet everything had already gone too far. Daniel returned home 2 days later. His suitcase rolled through the doorway with the same sound I'd once found comforting. This time it only filled the silence. He looked older, worn down by travel and work, his voice carrying the forced warmth of someone trying to reconnect with a life that no longer fit. I smiled the way I was supposed to, asked about his trip, and told him dinner was ready. Everything looked normal, sounded normal, but the air was heavier than before. Ryan came downstairs briefly, polite and distant. Daniel noticed the shift but didn't comment. He looked between us once, eyes narrowing slightly, as if something invisible had brushed past him. That night, we ate together like strangers forced into the same room by memory. The sound of silverware was the only conversation. Later, Daniel sat beside me on the couch, talking about work and deadlines. I nodded, pretending to listen, but my thoughts kept drifting. Every word he spoke reminded me of the distance that had grown between us, the one I'd quietly filled with another presence. Not physically, but emotionally. I realized then that love doesn't always die from betrayal. It dies from neglect long before betrayal ever has a chance. That he reached for my hand. It felt unfamiliar. I pulled away without meaning to, and that was enough. His eyes hardened. He didn't ask immediately, but I knew the question was coming. When it did, it was quiet, almost cautious. Is there something I should know? The air left my lungs. I wanted to deny it, to cover everything with the same politeness we'd both used for years. But something inside me broke instead. There's nothing you need to worry about, I said first, but my voice trembled. He caught it. That's not an answer, he said. His calmness was worse than anger. I stared at the floor, my throat burning with words that refused to come out clean. I crossed a line I shouldn't have, I said finally. His silence after that was louder than shouting. That he didn't ask what kind of line. Maybe he already knew. Maybe he didn't want to hear it. Still, he pressed. With who? The name stayed trapped behind my teeth until the sound of movement behind us froze me. Ryan stood in the doorway. He'd heard everything. His face was pale, unreadable. Daniel turned to look at him, then back at me, realization dawning in his eyes like a slow, cold wave. The next few seconds stretched endlessly. Ryan spoke first. It's not what you think, he said, his voice cracking. I was the one who made her uncomfortable. She didn't do anything wrong. I looked at him, shocked, but couldn't find words to stop him. Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to anger. Uncomfortable, he repeated. What the hell does that mean? Ryan took the blame I didn't deserve but somehow did. He admitted to saying things he shouldn't have, to getting too close, to crossing boundaries. None of it was true in the way he made it sound, but it protected me. Daniel didn't shout. He just stared at both of us with a look that stripped everything bare. I leave for work to give us a life, and this is what happens, he said quietly, as if speaking to himself. Then he walked out, the sound of the door closing marking the moment our lives split in two. I stood there, unable to move, while Ryan tried to speak, to explain. I couldn't let him hate you, he said. His voice shook, his eyes red. You didn't do anything wrong. But I had. Maybe not in the way he thought, but I had. Because silence can be an affair too. Emotional honesty shared in secret is its own kind of betrayal. I told him to go upstairs, to give me space, and for once, he listened. That night, I lay awake beside an empty half of the bed. Daniel didn't come back. The rain returned, the same soft rhythm that had filled the house the day everything started. I thought about how easily loneliness can disguise itself as connection, how quickly empathy can turn into need. I wondered if I had ever really loved Daniel, or if I'd only loved the version of him I was waiting for. The next morning, the house was silent again. Daniel's suitcase was gone. A note sat on the kitchen table, short, final, almost kind. I need time to think. Don't call me. I didn't cry. There's a numbness that settles in when the damage is too deep for tears. Ryan stayed in his room most of the day. When he finally came downstairs, he looked like someone carrying guilt too heavy for his age. He'll come back, he said softly, but we both knew it was a lie. You should go stay with a friend, I told him. It's better if we have space. He didn't argue, just nodded. Before he left, he said, I never meant for any of this to happen. Neither did I. When the door closed behind him, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the same window where it had all begun. The house felt heavier now, stripped of noise, stripped of pretense. I realized that sometimes infidelity doesn't need a kiss or a touch. It begins with attention, with care misplaced, with words that should have stayed unspoken. Days passed before Daniel called. His voice was tired. He didn't ask for explanations. He just said, we'll talk when I'm ready. That was the closest thing to forgiveness I'd get. I told him I'd wait, but deep down, I knew the version of us that once existed had ended long before that night. Sometimes I replay it all, the quiet moments, the glances, the unspoken emotions, and I wonder if I mistook connection for love. If maybe, in trying to feel seen, I blinded myself to the line I crossed. There's no undoing it, no rewriting the silence that followed. I learned that betrayal doesn't always scream, sometimes it whispers, and by the time you hear it, it's already too late.